I want to welcome you to the first unofficial episode of Turn Your Trauma into Treasure. I know that trauma has been trending, right? Just the expression of trauma has been trending and has been used and overused in different spaces. I just want to talk about what trauma is and then dig into a little bit of what trauma is not. But before I do that, let me introduce myself. My name is Sarita Irick. I am a certified trauma coach surrounding areas of trauma in childhood, surrounding areas of trauma in adulthood for women. Those are my specific areas of expertise. And in addition to that, I've had and experienced my own trauma. And in working through my trauma, I came to the realization that it's probably so many people that have trauma as a part of their everyday life and don't even realize they're living with it. Do not realize that every day that they wake up, that there is a second person or a second entity that wakes up with them, and that's trauma. It affects how we make decisions. It affects who we decide to share our lives with. It affects how we run our household. It affects how we show up in our jobs. It affects how we show up for our family. Trauma can really affect so many different areas. Hence the reason why I initially went through the journey of trauma healing and making sure that I am fully healed in my own right, just to make sure that I am walking in the purpose that is set for me, and that I am not allowing these things that has happened to me over time be the driver. So let's talk about the definition of trauma. Trauma is any negative experience that has left long lasting effects and that will block you and stop you from effectively walking in the things that you want. Trauma is any negative experience that has left long lasting effects and that will stop you and block you from walking in the thing or things that you want to do today. Now, I know you're saying, like, that could be anything. That's the truth. What it is not is it's not depression. Depression is a mental episode of overwhelming sadness and lethargia. That is a mental disorder. However, trauma can lead to depression. And I just want to make this disclaimer right away. I am not a psychologist. I am not a therapist. I am a certified trauma coach. And I am a person who has dealt with and lived through trauma for a very long time. So that is the platform in which you will be involved in today. I am, like I said, I am not a mental health expert. I will be bringing mental health experts onto this platform to give a deeper dive into those things. So I'm not going to speak too much on mental health, aside from saying that trauma is not depression, and aside from saying that although trauma is not depression, it could lead to depression. Um, so, one of the things that I recognize in trauma is that it sometimes shows up before your smile. It sometimes shows up before the thing that you want to do. Case in point, and we're going to talk about relationships today. Um, if you have relationships, platonic, family, or romantic, those are all relationships. When you are dealing with trauma, or if you have trauma and you're not quite dealing with it, because that's what we're going to talk about today as well, It can show up in different ways. One of the ways that it can show up is how you show up. So I saw this commercial a little while ago, and it was for depression and how the smile shows up, or you put this smiley face up when behind that smiley face you are depressed, right? That's the commercial. I'm not sure what the actual medication that they were trying to sell, but that's the commercial. How trauma shows up is in different ways, right? Trauma can show up in your physical body where you're anxious, where you're not sleeping well, where you're always second guessing what it is that you want to do. Trauma also shows up when you're dealing in relationships and you are either very angry because someone said one thing and it took you over the ledge, and you're ready to fight, you're ready to argue, you're ready to engage in a situation that, in most cases, if you weren't dealing with trauma, would not be an issue. That is called fight. That means you're ready to fight. Now, that is a typical response when you're in danger. When you're ready to fight, defend yourself, and make sure you're safe, that is one of the typical responses to that. But if you're getting that way because someone said a word to you, there will be times throughout every day of your life that you will be ready to fight. And that is not okay, because that will hinder you from a lot of things that you want to do. For an example, if you have a job and your employer said something to you that it was could have been one word or phrase, they said something to you that you felt was offensive, right? Instead of handling it in a professional manner, trauma will have you reacting in a way that will have you just not just unhinged. So that's an example. An example in relationships, if you have children and you have unresolved trauma, if your child doesn't do something that you want them to do, then you will react in a way that just is unhinged. I'm going to use myself as an example of how trauma would show up and how I would interact with my children. One, trauma would show up is like if I felt or gleaned or extracted from a situation that my children were even remotely being disrespectful. Either I had to call them twice, or they didn't do what I told them to do, or it was something that may have been misunderstood. Immediately, I would begin to scream, yell. My face would transform into something that it is not today. And then I would use vulgar terms, right? All in, all because trauma always made me feel like I was disrespected, always made me feel like I wasn't worth respecting. And so, in order to fight for the respect that I thought that I wanted to have, and that in the inside I didn't feel like I deserved, my children would get the brunt end of that. In relationships with friends, I always felt like I was misunderstood. I would say, "Do you understand?" And even if they wanted clarity, I could not give clarity because it's like, you didn't hear what I said the first time. Am I talking French? Am I talking to you? So it didn't come off like it should have. So, needless to say, I've had to do a lot of growing, a lot of seeking help, seeking either therapy, seeking someone that can coach me through, seeking someone that can mentor me through the process of dealing with that trauma. Every day is a work. I heard, I believe his name is Andre Morris, say that trauma is like that little kid that you have to watch when they're two, right? So, although you may be working through the process of getting better, you must constantly watch that trauma. You must constantly keep an eye on it. And if it gets too quiet, check in with yourself. Because if you have a 2 year old in your household and they're quiet for too long, you're going to want to know what they're doing and where they are. Even if you childproof the whole entire house, there's going to be a time where if you find them, they could be in some mess, literally. Okay? So you want to make sure that not that you're constantly in bondage to trauma, but that you check in with yourself, that you check in with the people who love you, and that you have a community that can help and guide you through those moments where you feel like you've gotten over something and you are back at that thing once again. Now, the ways in which there's a few ways that you can and that I've found that have helped me deal with trauma on a daily basis, a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. And it is checking in a source or believing in a source higher than yourself, right? It is believing in something that is greater than you. And the reason why this is important is that if you're in this place and you felt like, you've had this traumatic experience and you felt helpless,